Okay, so I wanted to chat a little bit as well about this idea of epistemic virtue. You mentioned it's kind of key to fostering quality thinking, but you also kind of suggest that it's still insufficiently recognized within contemporary philosophy. I wonder if you could kind of spell out what epistemic virtue is and kind of explain how we might be able to begin to, I guess, make it more broadly accepted or at least known about within sort of contemporary philosophy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for that. I mean, it's interesting when one kind of says that things are not so well known, etc., etc. You're always aware of the fact it depends in which circles you're talking about. We have this conversation on how sometimes say everybody knows about dot dot dot, and yet of course you look into the general culture and they don't. Um, Now, so epistemic virtue is an idea which has got more currency. I think most people who are doing philosophy in academia will be aware of it, but I still don't think it has the salience, and I don't think it's perhaps being taught as much. So, what's the idea? Well, think about how to think well. And if you were to do a critical thinking course or a course on philosophical method, of which actually there are very few still, interestingly enough, a lot of the time what you'll focus on is, well, the courses in philosophical method that we've had traditionally are basically the logic classes. That's the only one. You talk about what makes an argument valid and sound, whether it follows from the premises, and you'll learn about different kinds of argument, inductive, abductive, all that kind of thing. Don't worry, listener, if you're not following, it doesn't matter. I'm just giving you the idea that these technical aspects, if you like, of good thinking, learning to identify certain fallacies, for example. Now, all of this is very good and very important, and I'm not against that. I co-wrote a textbook, first edition of which is now over 20 years old, I think, the Philosopher's Toolkit. And the third editions came out last year. And a lot of it concerns these things. So I'm not against it. But I think over the years, I've become more and more kind of convinced that there's something importantly missing here. And I think the thing that convinces me is when you meet and you read very, very smart people who nonetheless seem to be going wrong in some way. And you sit there thinking, well, it's a bit. I'm not the. If you was to compare brains to computers and their computing power, I don't think my mind is top of the range for its computing power, right? So if these supercomputers are coming to different conclusions to me, and I think something's wrong, well, should I just not accept the fact that they're smarter than me? But being smart is not just about that. And I think that what you do see as well, once you start to do something that philosophers are not keen to do, which is to become a bit aware of the motivations and characters and personalities of the thinkers, you notice that actually it's very, very easy for people who are very, very smart to construct arguments which confirm what they already believe and what they want to believe. This is a very uncomfortable thing for philosophy, which sees itself as the disinterested pursuit of truth, because I think that it just doesn't stand up to empirical investigation. Actually, I'll tell you one thing that convinced me of this quite early on. So over 20 years now, I was invited to write an article for a journal on philosophical autobiography because a couple of these volumes have been put out. And I read about, I don't know how many, 8 to 12 autobiographies of philosophers, some very old like J.S. Mill, some more recent. And, when you read those things, it is patently obvious that there is a connection between the personalities and characters of the writers and the kind of philosophical position they came to. In particular, people who have these very kind of, what would you call it, quite rigid black and white mindsets tended to in favour of very sort of like very, very logical ways of looking at the world. Others had more of a kind of a, like Althusser or Feyerabend had a more of a kind of almost like a poetic sensibility. They were more suspicious of these very rigid categories and sort of like thinking that people were doing violence to the world by trying to make things conform to very simple binaries. Now, these are temperamental issues which go behind it. So I think I'm going around in the long route to the answer to what epistemic virtue is. So you recognize the fact that it's not just about your computing power or your philosophical tools. Other things are going to influence what conclusions you come to. You can't do much about your personality or your character. So it's the extent that that's the case. You can be aware of it and try to perhaps compensate for it to a certain extent. But the one thing you can do is you can think about the kind of attitudes that you're bringing to your thinking. So one of the key ones is, am I bringing an attitude of genuine, open inquiry to this? Or am I coming to this with the attitude of, I want to show how smart I am, I want to be right, I want to have a theory? Which a lot of people do. I mean, I think unfortunately, when people do philosophy, I find that too many people they really want to have their own theory, and often they end up sending them to me. I've got this new theory of free will. You think, well, okay, people have been trying to come up with theories of free will for millennia. You really think that in the privacy of your own room you've come up with one which beats all the rest? Probably not. But so a good place to start with this is a book called Truth and Truthfulness by Bernard Williams. Bernard Williams, if people don't know him, he's not a great public figure, but he's one of the most interesting and I think philosophers of the late 20th century. Very, very thoughtful. Curiously enough, someone who's not very well known for having positions on things. He wrote these very interesting, insightful essays often rather than full books. But he really got to the nub of things without feeling the need to rush to a kind of a theory which would capture it all. And in his last book, he talks about these virtues of truth. And the two key ones, I think he's probably still right, are sincerity and accuracy. So the point is this: if you're going to think about anything, forget about the techniques and methods, all that kind of stuff. Have a sincere interest. Be sincerely interested in discovering what is the case. Right? Try to do whatever you can to overcome your desire for what you want to be the case or what you assume to be the case. And accuracy is about, a lot of things we think about do involve facts or representing others' opinions. And we should try and do that as accurately as possible. If you're trying to argue against a view, well, you have to have the decency of presenting that view as accurately as possible and not take down some weakened strawman version of it. If you're trying to sort of use facts, then you've got to make sure you're using the facts properly. You're not just selecting the ones that are conveniently correct, fit your view, etc. So it's the attitudes we bring, and I think that's so important. I think it's really, really powerful, and I think that most people actually, on a lot of issues, there are some, obviously, particularly in science or things that require a lot of technical knowledge or perhaps certain skills. But if we're just trying to understand the world around us better, I think we can get a heck of a long way as long as you're sort of reasonable intelligence. If you sort of really try and think honestly and clearly and patiently, you can get a long way.
If you enjoyed this clip, then head on over to Locals to access the full conversation right now. Supporters can access the video version and everyone can access the audio only version of the conversation. I'll see you over there.